had when my mother had taken me there at 8 years old, after my father had been killed in the street riots that rocked Tokyo in the summer of 1960. Japan hardly felt like a home either, but what other prospects did I have? Whether it was fate, or circumstance, or just bad luck, a lead to the secret world represented my path of least resistance. The mechanics of the job were simple enough. Once a week or so, I would pick up a cheap shoulder bag from McGraw. Sometimes the handoff would be on a train, sometimes at a tachigui, eating while standing, street stall, sometimes, the symbolism not lost even on my younger self, in a public urinal. I would then exchange the full bag I was carrying for an empty one carried by a flunky from the other side, a plump and incongruously garrulous middle-aged Japanese guy named Miyamoto, who fancied floral-patterned ties that were flamboyantly wide and loud, even by the tragic sartorial standards of the day. 2 cutouts, so a lot of protection for the principals. Initially, I wasn't even sure who the principals were. I was mildly curious. I was barely 20 years old, after all, and didn't yet understand that the corollary to the expression, knowledge is power, is knowledge can be dangerous. But I had no real way of finding out. I'd looked inside the bag enough times to know it always contained $50,000 in cash. But the choice of currency offered no clues to the money's provenance or to its destination. The yen was laughably weak. The euro had barely been conceived in Brussels, let alone born, and though Nixon had recently taken America off the gold standard, the greenback was still the world's reserve currency, accepted with no questions asked from New York to Riyadh to Timbuktu. I was naive, but I wasn't stupid. I knew anyone with working arms and legs could be a bagman, so I understood I wasn't being paid just to carry a bag. I was being paid to take a fall, if it came to that. The trick for me was to make sure it wouldn't. And that's where I screwed up. I had just completed the exchange with Miyamoto in Ueno Park, part of Shitamachi, old Tokyo, the stalwart remnants of the city that had survived both the Great Kanto quake of 1923 and the American firebombs of some 20 years later. Even back then, the city was immense, the population over 11 million at night, with another 2 million swelling the streets and trains and office buildings during the day, forests of blinking neon in the entertainment quarters of Ikebukuro and Shibuya and Shinjuku, soot-covered, multi-level elevated highways dissecting neighborhoods and darkening sidewalks. Everywhere a cacophony of truck engines and commerce and construction work. The war, barely a generation distant, still clung to the country's consciousness like a nightmare from which its people had only recently awakened, and the city's energy was not yet so much about pursuing prosperity as it was about putting distance between the hope and progress of today and the horrors and loss of the recent past. I was wandering among the street stalls along Ameyoko, short for Ameya Yokocho, Candy Alley, so named because the area's earliest commercial establishments had been Ameya, or candy stores. That the moniker continued to work as shorthand for America Alley after the war, when the street had become an important black market for American goods, was mere serendipity. Either way, its stalls, most of them squeezed between narrow buildings to one side and the monstrous bulk of the elevated JR train tracks to the other, offered everything from spices and dried food and fresh fish to clothes and hardware and sporting goods to all manner of electronics, most of it cheap, all of it attracting crowds from morning to night. It was a typical summer afternoon in Tokyo, which is to say oppressively hot, humid, and polluted, and the air was heavy with the smells of yakitori and takoyaki and the other street delicacies of Ameyoko. Hawkers held their hands to either side of their mouths and cried out, "Hai dozo! Hai irashai!" this way and that over the sounds of nearby truck traffic and the occasional passing train, gesturing to shoppers being carried along by the slow-moving pedestrian river, entreating prospects, handing out samples, reeling in customers from the endless, shifting